Welcome back to Quick Questions for Lent. Eli's going to start us off.
Okay, so at the Last Supper, Jesus instructs his disciples to bring a sword to the Garden of Gethsemane, knowing that he's about to be arrested. So what is the deal with Jesus instructing his disciples to bring a sword? I have a theory about this, and a lot of people do, but because when they bring the sword, it tells us that later one of Jesus' disciples actually cuts off the ear of a temple official. Jesus then tells him to stop, and he heals the person's ear, and he said that that's not the way of my kingdom. And so I think what Jesus is actually doing is a teaching technique where he is telling them to bring something specifically so he can say that's not what we're going to use. So I think it's Jesus' way of instructing that his kingdom is not about the weapons of this world.
In Luke 22, we see the leading priests and the teachers of religious law wanting to kill Jesus. What doesn't the law say not to kill? So how do we make sense of this? In other places, Jesus calls the Pharisees and teachers of religious law blind guides. And sometimes in our lust for power, in our lust for control, our spiritual eyes can be blinded. We know what the right thing to do is, and we still don't do the right thing.
Just following that, in Luke 22, verse 3, Satan enters Judas. And what is the deal with Satan entering Judas? Can this happen to us? Why does this happen? Satan translated as the accuser. And so the accuser, Judas becomes an accuser. And actually, Jesus is about to be accused of things on trial. And Judas is the first step in that accusation. So rather than taking that as like the devil or the Satan enters this person, I think it's better interpreted as Judas becomes the first accuser of Jesus.
Going back to David's story in the Old Testament, David has a few chances to kill Saul, but doesn't. Why? So there's a civil war going on. David and his army are basically on the run, and Saul is trying to chase them down, and David in a few different times encounters him. Could have taken his life, but you see David, for all of his complexity, he strives to be a person with high integrity. Saul was still, and David says this, God's anointed king while he was alive, and David abided by that. And I think Saul was even a father figure for David. He grew up in his household. So there's a complex story there. We shouldn't read David's story or Saul's story as just a black and white, good guy, bad guy. These guys had a complicated relationship, and David really did strive for unity with Saul throughout his life.
In the David and Goliath story, what's the deal with everyone in the Israelite army being so scared of Goliath? Couldn't their army have taken him on? Goliath had set up this interesting way of, instead of killing all these armies, he said, how about one of your people come and fight one of my people? And in a one-on-one battle, everyone was scared of that idea. So it was kind of a stalemate. And God uses that whole situation to bring forth David to become this hero for the nation as he grows into becoming the king.
A tormenting spirit shows up in Saul a lot. Kind of going off the New Testament question, this tormenting spirit shows up in the Old Testament. Do we need to be afraid of a tormenting spirit? And I think what we see is that there are negative effects of not following what God has for us. And so rather than God sending suffering, we just talked about that. God doesn't send this tormenting spirit to torment Saul. This is a reality of the fallen world that Saul lives in, that there are negative consequences of Saul not following God, and it shows up in kind of evil and sad ways.
Super easy.